A major update here as far as Matt Gaetz is concerned. So you know by now that the House Ethics Committee is sitting on a report outlining Matt Gaetz's reported sexual misconduct with a minor. The committee was supposed to meet on Friday of last week. That meeting was rescheduled amid a pressure campaign by the broader Republican Party that, of course, was content to do Donald Trump's bidding and swoop in to rescue his embattled Attorney General nominee. The first update is that committee will now meet on Wednesday of this week to determine next steps, which is good news. The second update is probably even better, because Republican Ethics Committee Chairman Michael Gaetz spoke with Speaker Johnson, who of course reiterated his call not to release the report, with Gaetz saying, "I appreciate Mike reaching out. I don't see it having an impact on what we as a committee ultimately decide." I should also note that this committee is split equally, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, and the fact that this committee continued its work on Matt Gaetz even after the DOJ dropped its charges into him is a testament to how seriously they are taking this issue, regardless of the committee's partisan makeup. Now, Johnson, for his part, is pushing back on criticism that he's trying to influence the Ethics Committee's ultimate decision, telling reporters that he does not have the authority to dictate anything to the Ethics Committee. Quote, "I'm not telling the Ethics Committee what to do. It is not my place to do so. I've been very clear. I'm merely responding to the questions that every single media outlet in America is asking me." Right, he's not trying to influence the committee. He's simply telling people in his conference his stance as the top Republican in the party for the mere satisfaction of engaging in conversation. He's definitely totally not using his position of power to influence anyone. He's simply engaging in an exchange of ideas with no agenda whatsoever. Got it. And it's not just Mike Johnson not trying to influence anyone. Donald Trump himself is also not trying to influence his party. According to Axios, he's calling Senate Republicans to pressure them into confirming Matt Gaetz. Kevin Cramer, for example, said he clearly wants Matt Gaetz. He believes Matt Gaetz is the one person who will have all the fearlessness and ferociousness, really, to do what needs doing at the Department of Justice. One thing about Donald Trump, people should never confuse his support for one of his nominees as a tactical or strategic tool for somebody else. And at least to this point, he's putting his own political capital behind it, and he's a pretty persuasive guy. And if you listen closely enough, you can actually hear this grown-ass man's spine turn from a solid to a liquid in real time. Pretty impressive stuff. I suppose this would be a good time to remind everyone that Senate Republicans are not only a co-equal branch of government, but 2/3 of them aren't even up for re-election in the Trump era. Someone, please, tell these people that they don't have to be afraid anymore. It's okay. Now, I should note that there is a secondary reason that Trump is pushing to get Gaetz confirmed, and it flies directly in the face of what Kevin Cramer just said. According to the New York Times, but Mr. Trump has shown no sign of withdrawing the nomination, which speaks volumes about his mindset as he staffs his second administration. He is making calls on Mr. Gaetz's behalf, and he remains confident that even if Mr. Gaetz does not make it, the standard for an acceptable candidate will have shifted so much that the Senate may simply approve his other nominees who have appalled much of Washington. I have been saying for days that the luckiest person in DC is Pete Hegseth, the Weekend Fox and Friends host and a uniquely unqualified nominee who, after the Gaetz nomination and the Tulsi Gabbard nomination, suddenly looks like Winston Churchill. And considering even Trump knows that the Democrats have to choose their battles and can't offer outcry against everyone, that if the bar becomes Matt Gaetz, then relative to that bar, suddenly damn near everybody looks palatable by comparison. There is really no downside as far as Trump is concerned. Best case scenario, he gets a complete and total groveling sycophant and loyalist in charge of the DOJ and turns the department into his own personal retribution force. And worst case, he dilutes the sense of incompetence of every other nominee, and folks like Tulsi and RFK Jr. suddenly don't seem too bad. All predicated on perhaps the most cynical and dangerous strategy in politics. Now, in terms of a little more insight into the Gaetz of it all, there is one mark against him, and it's a big one, in that we all know the reason that he resigned from Congress initially was just expressly to bury the ethics report that was set to be released against him just days before his resignation, and he was operating under this pretense that the House Ethics Committee only has jurisdiction over members in the House, and so in theory, Gaetz resigning would immediately remove him from the House's jurisdiction and render the investigation moot and lower the likelihood that that report would be released, if not eliminated altogether. Well, It turns out that's not exactly the case.
You know, there is precedent for the House and Senate ethics committees to not only continue investigations, but also release findings after a member resigns in scandal. And I know you've talked about this. There's Representative Eric Massa, where the committee kept investigating him for sexually inappropriate behavior after he resigned from Congress. And the Senate Ethics Committee also publicly released its report into Senator John Ensign days after his resignation. And that was even forwarded to the DOJ. So while we keep talking about this Gaetz report possibly being leaked, could it just be released under the right amount of pressure? What do you think?
I think the answer to that is yes. There, as you pointed out, there is precedent for reports to be released after a member has resigned. You mentioned Senator Ensign, and I know there have been at least a couple of cases in the House of Representatives. But this is an unprecedented case. Ordinarily, if a member resigns, you leave them alone, you let them go off and live their lives because usually they've resigned in disgrace. In the case of Matt Gaetz, though, he has been nominated to become the top law enforcement officer of the United States of America. The Senate Judiciary Committee will want that report as part of their official record as they conduct their review of his credentials during the nomination process. So there is a reason to release this report, if for no other reason than to assist the Senate. And I would also argue that the American people probably have a right to see this report. They would like to know if there's anything in here about an attorney general nominee that they should know. I mean, this isn't particularly difficult as far as I'm concerned. And by the way, a report like this, the investigation is completed. Apparently, it's completed. The issue only was whether or not they were going to vote to adopt it and then release it publicly. So they're really not investigating him any further. That is the House Ethics Committee. So I don't understand why this should be such a difficult move. And by the way, the Speaker of the House, when I was chairman, the Speaker of the House, both Speakers Boehner and Ryan, never interfered with anything we did on the committee. There are a couple times when I've actually briefed them on matters, along with my ranking member, because it's an even committee. We always did things together. But that's usually the way it works. That frankly, the only thing John Boehner ever asked me to do when he made me chairman of the Ethics Committee was to make sure the committee functioned. That's all he ever asked. And that's what we did. He didn't involve himself in anything that we did, and nor should he. It wouldn't have been appropriate.
Notice how he explained that in the past, the Speaker didn't interfere with the Ethics Committee investigations. Now you've got Mike Johnson literally holding one-on-one conferences with the chair of the Ethics Committee after having expressly come out publicly against the release of a damaging report. If you were looking for the de-evolution of the Republican Party in real time, look no further than Mike Johnson. And in fact, Amy Klobuchar picked up on exactly that point of there being precedent too.
This has happened a number of times with a Republican senator when he left for the good of the public. The report was released, and a Democrat in the House of Representatives once left, and the report was released after.
There is literally precedent for releasing damaging reports. And so now, not only is it common sense to release this report, given the fact that Gaetz was nominated for Attorney General and the Senate has a vested interest in being able to properly vet him, but there's actually no reason that the House should bury it at all. It is not only the obvious thing to do, but there is precedent to do it. Granted, it's one thing to show clips of former Republicans who've suddenly found their tongues again and current Democrats who, of course, can tell right from wrong, because frankly, the guy I'm about to show you is probably more representative of today's Republican Party.
Well, it's my understanding that is not supposed to go public. So if it's not supposed to under the rules, it shouldn't go public. And what I know about Matt Gaetz is one of the best members we had on our committee. In my time in Congress, which has been a while, I don't know, there are very few people who have the cross-examination skills he does. And I want someone in the Justice Department who's not going to say moms and dads at school board meeting needs to be investigated. I want someone at the Justice Department who's going to say it's wrong for the FBI to do a memorandum and say that pro-life Catholics are extremists. I want someone at the Justice Department who can tell us who planted the pipe bombs on January 6th, who leaked the Dobbs opinion, who put cocaine at the White House instead of all the other stuff they seem to be focused on.
Just one guy who ignored sexual misconduct advocating for ignoring more sexual misconduct. Surprise, surprise. If nothing else, at least they're consistent. So all eyes will remain on the House Ethics Committee this Wednesday for the hopeful release of this report, because I understand that protecting sexual predators has become a core function of today's GOP, but it's not something that I nor the rest of this country should be willing to normalize, and certainly not to reward with a promotion to the role of the top law enforcement official in America. Before you go, just a quick note, if you'd like to see more of my content, which is always free of advertising, sponsorships, and paywalls, please make sure to subscribe to this channel using the subscribe button right here on the screen. And if you'd like to support my work even further, you can grab a copy of my instant #1 New York Times selling book, Shameless, available for sale right now. That link is also on the screen. Thanks so much for watching.